Have you ever wondered if something can last forever, if everything that rises must eventually fall? Capitalism would be condemned to the same fate. And what if, instead of being overthrown by external forces, it were silently digging its own grave? Karl Marx prophesied that capitalism would bring about its own destruction because its logic of infinite expansion would make it unsustainable. Friedrich Nietzsche, on the other hand, would argue that capitalism is a reflection of the human condition itself, our will to power turned into money and merchandise. But what happens when this force becomes so great that it can no longer be controlled? We live in a world where capitalism is not only an economic system, but a lens through which we perceive reality. It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism, wrote Mark Fisher. This phrase is not just a play on words. It describes what the philosopher called capitalist realism, the feeling that there is no viable alternative to the world we know. But what if we are wrong? And if capitalism itself is a machine accelerating toward its own destruction? Accelerationists believe exactly that the increasing speed of technology in the market will lead us to an inevitable collapse or to a future we cannot even imagine. The question is, what happens when a system that has always promised infinite growth begins to reach its limits? Will capitalism disappear soon, or will it simply transform into something even more unrecognizable? Let's explore these questions and maybe understand if we are on the edge of a new world or the end of everything we know. Capitalism gives us the impression of being an indestructible system, an entity that adapts to any crisis, reborn from the ashes, stronger every time. From the beginning, it has been like this. Wars, recessions, financial collapses, all of these should have been enough to bring it down, but it has only changed form, absorbing the blows and reinventing itself. Does this mean it will never end? Or is its resilience actually a symptom of a system that refuses to accept its own end, artificially prolonging its existence? Mark Fisher said we live under capitalist realism, a kind of collective enchantment where the only possible reality is that governed by the market. With each new technological advance, with each new economic cycle, we get the impression that there is no escape. Jan Baudrillard went even further. For him, capitalism has not only become our reality, but it has distorted it to such an extent that we live in a simulacrum, an illusion of freedom where everything is a commodity, even our own ideas and feelings. But it wasn't always like this. There was a time when other political and economic systems seemed viable, even inevitable. Feudalism, for example, dominated Europe for centuries, and for a medieval peasant, it was inconceivable that a world without lords and serfs could exist. However, it took a series of social and technological transformations for it to collapse. In the same way, the empires of the past, which seemed eternal, succumbed under the weight of their own structure. The Roman Empire, which was thought to be indestructible, fell not only due to barbarian invasions, but because its own economic and political system became unsustainable. And if capitalism were following the same path, if it was ever a driver of progress, today it looks more like a car out of control, accelerating aimlessly. Marx predicted that capitalism would collapse due to its own internal contradictions. The accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few, unchecked exploitation, the transformation of everything into merchandise. But maybe it doesn't even need to be destroyed by a revolution. Maybe it is self-destructing. Technology is one of the main vectors of this transformation. For centuries, capitalism relied on human labor to expand, but now we are increasingly closer to a world where automation and artificial intelligence will make much of the workforce obsolete. What will happen when the capitalists themselves no longer need consumers because everything can be produced without human effort? Capitalism has always been based on the idea of scarcity. Something needs to be limited in order for it to have value. But technology is challenging that fundamental principle. In the novel Lord of Light by Roger Zelazny, the colonizers of a distant planet take on the role of gods, controlling access to technology to maintain inequality. But eventually, someone rebels against this system, trying to free the population from the illusion they lived in. This brings us to a troubling question. Are we living something similar? Is the financial and technological elite controlling the narrative to maintain their position while the system moves toward an inevitable collapse? If capitalism disappears, what will come next? Can we imagine a world without it, or are we so immersed in this reality that, like feudal lords before us, we cannot even conceive of its end? Maybe the answer lies in acceleration, not in resisting capitalism, but in pushing it to its limit. If it is truly unbreakable, it should be able to withstand any speed. But what happens if, at some point, the acceleration becomes unsustainable? What happens when a system designed to grow indefinitely meets a limit it cannot surpass? Capitalism has always been a growth machine. Since its rise, each technological revolution has only served to reinforce it, making it more efficient, more expansive, faster. But what if that speed, instead of guaranteeing its survival, is what leads it to collapse? There is a fundamental principle in physics. The faster something moves, the greater the force required to control it. Capitalism is becoming too fast to be governed, and that could be a problem that even its biggest beneficiaries cannot solve. Nick Land, the philosopher of accelerationism, saw this clearly. For him, capitalism is not just an economic system. It is almost an autonomous entity, an organism that develops uncontrollably, driven by the logic of technology and the market. Land believed that the future no longer belongs to us. It belongs to artificial intelligence, to digitized capital, to forces that no longer need humanity to operate. Artificial intelligence does not need a passport, he wrote. Capital doesn't either. What does this mean? That capitalism could be slipping from the hands of those who created it? Think of the speed at which technology advances. The first programmable computer appeared in the 1940s. Today, chips have billions of transistors, and artificial intelligence is already beginning to surpass humans in various areas. Never before in history has change been so rapid. What once took centuries now happens in decades, sometimes in years. And capitalism, driven by the need for infinite growth, only accelerates this transformation. Accelerationism starts with a troubling premise. If capitalism is doomed to collapse, the best strategy is not to resist it, but to accelerate its logic to the breaking point. Marx suggested something similar when he said that capitalism creates its own contradictions. But accelerationism takes this idea to another level. Instead of waiting for the system to collapse naturally, why not push it even faster toward its final destination? This might sound like apocalyptic thinking, but in some ways it is already happening. Technological advancement not only accelerates production and consumption, but also widens inequalities. If capitalism once relied on workers to generate wealth, automation is making much of the workforce obsolete. If economic crises used to be cyclical events, now they seem to be more constant and unpredictable. The concentration of wealth has reached unimaginable levels. While billions struggle to survive, a few individuals accumulate fortunes that exceed the GDP of entire nations. This extreme inequality could be a symptom that the system itself is nearing its limit. When an organism grows too large, it collapses under the weight of its own structure. The empires of the past fell because their expansion became unsustainable. And if capitalism were following the same path? The most terrifying thing is that there is no plan. No one seems to have control of this machine. Governments try to regulate the market, but they are constantly surpassed by the speed of technological innovation. Giant companies dominate entire sectors of the economy, but even they are vulnerable to the forces of capitalism itself. In the end, we are all in a vehicle accelerating toward the unknown. But who is behind the wheel? The answer might be uncomfortable, maybe no one. Capitalism, as an emergent intelligence, might have become a self-replicating system that grows on its own, without the need for a central command. Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari describe capitalism as a flow, corroding everything around it. If this is true, then there is no way to stop it. But there may be a way to force it to reveal its destiny. Acceleration could be the key to that revelation. If capitalism needs infinite growth to survive, what happens when it becomes too fast to sustain its own foundations? Technology might be its greatest ally, but also its worst enemy. If the logic of absolute efficiency leads to a world where humans are disposable, where resources are extracted until exhausted, where inequality becomes unbearable, then acceleration might not be an option, but an inevitable path to its destruction. The question left is, when that moment comes, will we be ready for what comes after? If capitalism is accelerating toward its own end, the big question is, will that end be a catastrophic collapse or a transformation into something even more unpredictable? When a system collapses, two things can happen. Either it disappears, taking with it everything it holds up, or it transforms radically into something new. But are we capable of conceiving what will come after capitalism? Or are we so immersed in it that, like fish in water, we cannot even imagine its absence? Here, accelerationist thought divides into two major blocks. On the one hand, there are those who believe that capitalism is leading us toward a post-capitalist future where technology will free humanity from work, inequality, and material limitations. This vision echoes the ideas of Karl Marx, who believed that the advance of productive forces would eventually make capitalism obsolete. If technology could produce abundance, the system based on scarcity and competition would lose its reason for existence. We might enter a new era where human labor would be minimized and society would function more cooperatively. But there is another side to the coin, a much darker one. Accelerationism can also be seen as a harbinger of the end of humanity as we know it. Nick Land and the most radical accelerationists saw the collapse of capitalism as the beginning of something alien, a world where humanity could become irrelevant in the face of artificial intelligence and capitalist machines that no longer need us. Will we be replaced by the very system we created? The machine that consumes our labor, now no longer needing human input, could continue on its own, outpacing even the most radical predictions of technological progress. In this case, the end of capitalism would not mark the end of exploitation, but rather the creation of a new kind of exploitation, one where human beings are no longer necessary or even capable of understanding the forces that control them. This vision of the future presents a stark dichotomy. On the one hand, there is the possibility of human flourishing beyond capitalism, where technology frees us from the drudgery of labor and our resources are shared in a more equitable manner. This would be the utopian version of a post-capitalist world, where technological advancements are repurposed for human well-being, not profit. On the other hand, there is the darker scenario, where the very forces of capitalism's acceleration, its drive for maximum efficiency and growth, lead to the obsolescence of humanity itself. If artificial intelligence and automated systems replace us, humans may become mere bystanders in the world we once controlled. The machine, operating according to its own rules, may evolve beyond our comprehension, reshaping the world in ways that are unrecognizable and potentially catastrophic for human existence. In this second scenario, the collapse of capitalism would not lead to the liberation of mankind, but to the birth of a new world order, one in which humanity is either sidelined or replaced. The dream of a post-capitalist society, one where we are freed from the pressures of work, might not come to fruition. Instead, we might find ourselves in a world where humans are no longer central to the equation of progress. Accelerationism, in its most extreme form, advocates for embracing this future, however uncertain and uncomfortable it may seem. If the end of capitalism is inevitable, then why not push it to its ultimate conclusion? The idea is that by accelerating the forces driving capitalism, the expansion of technology, the acceleration of global markets, the automation of labor, we can hasten the arrival of this new world, even if it means leaving behind everything we know and understand. But the question remains, is this the future we want? Can we, as a species, come to terms with the idea that we may no longer be the dominant force on Earth? If capitalism is driving us toward a future where machines reign supreme, what role will we have in that world? Will we be mere consumers, or will we adapt and evolve in ways that we can hardly imagine? Perhaps the most pressing question is whether we can ever truly escape the grip of capitalism. Even if we destroy it, can we construct something new in its place? The very ideas of growth, progress, and efficiency that capitalism has ingrained in our society are so deeply rooted in our collective consciousness that it may be impossible to imagine a world that functions without them. In some ways, capitalism has become our religion, and the thought of its collapse is almost unimaginable. Yet this is the paradox we face. The system that has defined our world for so long is rapidly approaching its limits. And whether we want to or not, we may soon have no choice but to confront the question of what comes next. The lessons of Bonhoeffer, Cipolla, and Adorno remind us that the true danger lies not in the individuals who hold power, but in the willingness of ordinary people to accept whatever narrative is presented to them without question. The willingness to follow blindly is what sustains the systems of control. The antidote to this danger is the cultivation of independent thought, the courage to resist the pressures of conformity, and the strength to stand up for truth, even when it is uncomfortable. In the end, the resistance to social stupidity is not about being right all the time. It is about maintaining the courage to continue seeking truth and engaging in meaningful dialogue. It is about creating a culture that values reflection over passivity, that encourages questions instead of blind obedience, and that fosters intellectual humility over arrogance. By doing so, we can begin to dismantle the systems that thrive on collective ignorance and work towards a more informed, more just society. As we come to the end of this journey through the dangers of collective ignorance and the importance of critical thinking, let us remember the words of those who have illuminated the path of intellectual resistance. It is up to each one of us to stand firm in the face of conformity, to challenge the narratives that seek to manipulate us, and to embrace the courage to question. With that, we close this chapter of reflection and awakening. Stay vigilant, stay inquisitive, and above all, stay true to the pursuit of knowledge. This is the being of knowledge, where the truth is never taken for granted, but always sought. Until next time, keep questioning, keep evolving, and keep resisting. Signed, the being of knowledge.